The theme for this session is Public Affairs 3.0 towards modern multi-stakeholder engagement. I know it sounds like a very theoretical topic, but it is not. It's here. It's real, and ties in perfectly with what Suresh Seshadri said in the first session. That one of the biggest trends is going to be that the world is not flat, and how do geopolitical issues impact the economy and therefore the brands. So it perfectly ties in the space of what public affairs does. First up, I'd like to introduce Himanshu Darshi, who's Director Public Policy and Government Affairs at PepsiCo India. Welcome, Himanshu.
Yeah,
I can't
thank you,
spot you.
Parul. Yeah. Welcome on.
Thank you. And Himanshu, I'm aware that you have a hard stop at 4 p.m. So we'll make sure that we free you up before that. Welcome. Very glad to have you here. Next up, I'd like to welcome Dr. Gaurav Arya, Director of Programs Health, NERDS. Welcome, Dr. Arya.
Hi, Parul. Thank you. I hope you
Yeah.
can hear me clearly.
Yes, you look like as if you're in a hunting log somewhere. So
I am.
I do hope. Good, good. At least one of us is having fun outside. It really looks like a very interesting place. Welcome to this conversation. I'd like to introduce Raj Sahu, Director Strategy in Public Affairs, Samsung, and Chair FICCI EODB. Welcome, Raj.
Thank you so much, Parul. And I really envy Dr. Arya sitting there in the midst of nature. And me being a wildlife enthusiast, especially the big cats, I really envy you, Dr. Arya.
Great. Maybe we can have the next conversation together in a place like this.
Absolutely, absolutely. I would love to.
That would be wonderful. And if it is not just for public affairs people, I'm going to invite myself to that conversation. And last but not the least, we have Srinivas Vanuva, Director of Public Affairs and Government Relations, Hill and Knowlton Strategies India. Welcome, Srini.
Thanks, Parul. Good afternoon, everyone.
And Srini is the one who's put together the entire panel on this. Without his help and support, it would not have been possible. So thank you once again. Before we actually start this conversation, I just wanted to read out a bit from the post that Raj was kind enough to put out. And I think it'll set the tone perfectly for the conversation. In this post, Raj says that public affairs has never mattered more because of COVID, overall healthcare, climate change, ESG, data, digital governance, shared economy. And he says that there's never been a precedence as such as for how public policy is concerned. COVID has completely disrupted the world, and never have you seen laws and IP being discussed and implemented in lightning speed. I think the vaccine and the vaccine coalition is a very good example of that. And he says that never could you have a cab company or a hotel company which doesn't own a single asset in terms of a cab or an actual hotel would be one of the highest valued firms in the world. And so this is why, we have to adapt to the changing environment. And this is why public policy matters even more. I think a great context for this. So I have a very specific set of questions for all of you. So I'm going to put the same questions to all of you so that what I think we're going to benefit from is a very wide range of issues on this topic. So first up, the question is, how are businesses prepared to engage with industry associations, business partners, community consumers, trade bodies? So never have there been so many stakeholders to really engage with. So how are businesses prepared for that? First to you, Himanshu.
Yeah, thank you, Parul, and thanks. So trade associations play a major role in advocacy. In a lot of companies uses the capability of associations for making them the voice of the industries. Entities get themselves associated with them based on the gravitas of issues and also on underlying common interests among all the member companies. A recent example, what we have seen as an industry also in their effective collaboration during COVID lockdowns with the companies by organizing various virtual meetings with the government machinery across the state, across the district for the business unlock. If we talk about working collectively with the allies partners like distributors, farmers, co-packers, suppliers, It's a complete growth story for all the organizations. A global company not only brings their own capabilities, but also it's expected that they build in local capacities by various partnerships across the value chain. In the instances when self-reliant India came and vocal for local became the ambition of the national government, then the strength of local network created by the organizations brought the synergy between company priorities and country leadership. If we talk about community, as a responsible company, community is the family to everybody. Yeah, all the organizations working closely with them and uplifting them through a lot of sustainable partnership programs creates inclusivity in the business model for the whole organization. During COVID lockdown, it's a recent example. We have seen that communities stood together with us, either in terms of securing beds or in terms of supply of oxygen cylinders. It is true example to reflect on the equity developed with the community and the entities. In context to central and state government regulatory and licensing bodies, I would opine that industry have seen transparency and ease of doing business by getting a lot of circulating advisories, getting a lot of permissions in like least turnaround time. So these are my takeaways.
Thank you so much, Himanshu. Now, the same question I'd like to take to Raj. Raj, what is your take on how businesses should handle the sheer scale of stakeholders that are required to be handled now?
Thank you, Parul. In fact, what Himanshu actually said, that sets a tone right. And in today's world, when we talk about it, then it's necessity actually. And when we stand together, then probably we can fight a bigger challenge. And when I'm saying this, I'm talking about the industry bodies or the trade bodies or the associations to say, which comes together to fight a bigger challenge. I would give an example. For example, let's say our team in Samsung, or let's say, Himanshu's team, we all have team of 10, 20, 30 people and across the state, across the, in the headquarters. So if you'll see, then we understand our own business much better. So probably one may actually think that we do not require a industry body to say. But when something like, let's say, a COVID hits us, we really do not know. Something like, let's say, a trade policy which comes and that impacts across the sector, let's say a F&B sector or a IT or electronic sector. And that actually impacts all of us in a positive way or in a negative way, probably. And there is where this, multilateral or multi-stakeholder engagement is, it becomes very important. But it also is very pertinent or important to engage and map the internal stakeholders. And then only there could be a right kind of engagement with the external stakeholders. For example, let's say a finance or taxation team that is facing some problem. So there has to be some kind of correlation and some kind of a meeting point with similar kind of offices or departments in other companies who actually require same kind of help. And there is where we can actually reach out to industry bodies or business partners. And this is where, and especially in today's world, that is where it's not only the industry association, but also the suppliers or distributors who are our intrinsic stakeholder, who actually makes our business happen. So there is where, again, I'm saying that the public affairs or public policy team of any company or any agency or any advisory services company, it becomes very important. Going forward, as we focus more and more on ESG aspect of it, that is environmental governance and the social aspect of it, it will require more cohesive approach for every one of us, either it is Srini or Himanshu or Dr. Arya, or even for, let's say, an organization like PR Movement, to elaborate it and to make it reach more and more people. So that would be my opening thought on this.
Over to Dr. Gaurav Arya, your take on the complexity of multi-stakeholder engagement in public affairs 3.0.
Sure. Thanks, Parul. And, here I would like to share a very personal anecdote. Over the last 2 years, I've been in 3 different roles, starting from the industry when I was working with Abbott, providing essential medicines, to working with Children's Investment Fund Foundation, where we were doing impact investing, to currently my role working with Health Nerds, where we are working very closely with the government on several aspects of policy. And what I observed over last 2 years, specifically during the COVID time, but also prior to that, in the 15 years of work that I've worked closely with the government, is that it's all about collaboration and coalitions now. It's a very interconnected world, as Srinivas and also Himanshu and Raj have mentioned previously. The important thing here is that we can't do anything alone. So whether it's building an automobile or looking at uh, any of the policy changes or work around health, it's all very interconnected. So everyone is working on one particular aspect of service delivery or policy chain. So, and that's where, whether it's the industry itself or in terms of the private sector or in public sector or community based organizations. So right now the place where I am at is a community based organization which is working on social development and livelihoods. So, and again, it's while it's very closely connected with uh, the community, it needs the private sector impetus, it needs the public sector policymakers inputs on making things work. So even if we were to look at, let me take an example of a girl child. If we were to make sure that a girl in today's community grows up to be a confident young individual who is able to be skilled up to provide or to fend for herself, but also provide positive contribution to the community, she needs development at the household level. She needs schooling which is of good quality, education which is supported by private sector well enough so that she's able to derive livelihood for herself and the family subsequently, and then be a change agent. We all need to work together. And I would just take the examples that were discussed previously around vaccines and telemedicine. All of the policy changes that we contributed to, which happened so fast, were in many ways a collaborative effort. It was the industry working together with the government, working very closely with international organizations like WHO and UNICEF. So it's very important that we communicate the right intent. We invest wisely as well. So while I work very closely with the government, what I've often observed is that there is a lack of trust or inadequate trust. I won't say there is lack of trust, there is inadequate trust. But what happened during the COVID crisis was that those walls were broken. That trust developed to a level which I haven't seen in last 20 years of my work, working at the public-private partnership in interface. And the reason for that was the need. So the government wanted the private sector to contribute. The private sector wanted the government to make the policy changes. The community wanted private sector and public sector to work together. Thus, all of that happened. And all of that happened for the mutual benefit of the community at large. And everybody benefited from that, whether it was around getting a vaccine to the market, whether it was around logistics and supply chain, whether it was around the policy making bodies like the Niti Aayog making policies for getting medicines beyond the scope of the indication very quickly to the market. These all happen, and the only reason why this happened was this increased level of trust between the private and the public sector, increased level of trust between the community and the government. And all of it will not work if that communication is broken. So I would go back to what we were discussing in the previous section around having strong communication. And then subsequently, maybe we'll also discuss around data and the use of evidence in making sure that whatever we are doing and communicating is in line with what is really proven in terms of data and science. So that's where I'll take a pause and hand it over back to you, Parul.
Say a quick response to what Dr. Arya actually said. That little mistrust. If you'll see the flow of COVID from the first wave to the second wave, and that was actually addressed later on in the second wave. A lot of kind of cohesion, a lot of cooperation actually started between the private and the public sector in the second wave. This is what exactly in the first state. Now, of my opening remarks, I said it was new to everyone. It was actually new to everyone.
I'm coming after Himanshu and Raj and Gaurav, who spent in the industry, being a kind of seasoned experts. So I'm just trying to sum up some of their key takeaways, the inputs. And see, globally, if you actually see, and that's also very evident in India, that public affairs can't be in isolation, because the politics and the policy do not operate in vacuum today. Having said this, if you look at from a policy perspective, the policy is devised as most of the people, most of the times. And for a country like India, if you're talking about this one, India is all about scale and how do you actually make things happen at the last mile. And this, is very difficult either for a government or a single stakeholder to actually do this, to move nuts and bolts and make things happen at the ground level. And that's where we have, and in fact and as the eminent speakers before me said, that this has emanated even more and has become more more visible due to the COVID pandemic, right? The kind of things that we have seen. So net, what it actually boils down to is that's the reason why we call this a public affairs 3.0, where we move beyond just government relationships, and the businesses are today find themselves being actively engaged with the different stakeholders who are like not just governments and policymakers, right? There are other channel partners, distributors, civic societies, and communities that they are engaging with. So we call this a kind of a 360 plus, a holistic approach, wherein the businesses are actually required to manage diverse stakeholders, and at the same time also value some of the kind of sentiments that are emanating and dynamics emanating out of these stakeholders. So that's the reason why we call it a kind of a 360 plus approach and a holistic approach to the public affairs beyond just government relationships and diverse stakeholder management. In short, so that's the kind of sum up lined up for this panel discussion.
Thank you so much. And my second question is that our current PA practices equipped with proactive risk assessment of business implications. What are the what are the risks which happen when there is a dynamic set of stakeholders and they have interaction among each other as well? So is the modern PA business equipped to handle those? Himanshu, I'm just trying to unmute you. Yes, please go ahead.
In identifying that intelligence to sense the headwinds and tailwinds, one of the actions required is to have a consultative relationship with the stakeholder instead of having a cause-based relationships. That's what a lot of PA professionals do in order to have a more consultative-based relationship. That the consultative approach not only helps them in proactive risk identification, but also in demonstration of their expertise in qualitative risk assessment, which is purely based on personal judgment and expertise. That's where situational leadership comes in. There have been instances where the in-depth state-driven policies are also to be understood by modern PA professionals to have a site-specific risk assessment. But still, going forward, it's a vast exercise to have a proper understanding of public policy and then use their skill sets to do a pest analysis, like what we say in PFPA role also, is to have a pest analysis which involves political, economic, social, and technological changes all across the dynamics in order to evaluate the long, mid, and short-term risks.
Thank you so much, Himanshu. I'd like to hand over now the same question to Raj. Raj, how do you solve? Is modern PA prepared for the risk assessment which is required for handling this kind of multiple stakeholder engagement?
Let me just give you a little bit of perspective about the public affairs or public policy per se. When we talk about risk assessment for which will have some kind of implication on businesses. Public affairs is a science, yes. There's a method to it, but it's not a perfect science. But surely it gives some kind of business a definitive direction for sure. So that is number one. So whether to equip ourselves, that is businesses, with proactive risk assessment, is what Himanshu said. That depends on our own assessment, how to actually go about it. So, but yes, it does give a direction. However, in last few years, and especially I'm talking about the last 2 decades to say, there are a lot of kind of documentary guidelines which are now available, which will give you a definitive direction or a idea or a drag that which direction actually you want to go to. When we talk about the in Indian context, and there is where I'm talking about the responsible business conduct rules or guidelines that India has actually introduced in last few years. To start with, the national voluntary guidelines that the Ministry of Corporate Affairs actually implemented. Of course, these are all voluntarily to be done. It started, if I'm not wrong, in 2011. Before that, also there are a lot of kind of rules, regulations which actually came in, and those have those tools to assess the risk that business may have, and these are essentially leading towards from financial reporting to non-financial reporting also. So these are some of the things that is happening. These, when I'm talking about NVG, that National Voluntary Guidelines, these are expected to provide guidance to businesses on what constitutes responsible business, what will be sustainable development goals that United Nations has actually set. If I'm looking for an investor as a business, then they are going to kind of look into these aspects or parameters based on which they are going to invest. So these are those assessment or those what do you call meters to say, or equipment or tool to assess your business, that how risk averse or risk taking you are, and then how your businesses will go. And I'm simply talking about non-financial assessment. These are non-financial assessment which are going to impact you in long run. From NVG, that is National Voluntary Guideline, and slowly the laws have actually emerged in a much cohesive and bigger way. And now we know that national guidelines on responsible business conduct that I was talking about earlier, that is RBC, which was introduced. And slowly, if you all recall or probably appreciate that, especially for the listed companies, what SEBI has done, that that non-financial reporting have also been made mandatory for a larger group now. Earlier, it was only for top 100 companies, but now it is for top 1,000 companies. So these are some of the tools, and I'm just going a little theoretical here, but these are some of the signs, which will tell you that public affairs is actually a very organized science. Earlier it was not, but now it is coming to the picture, and that will probably answer your question whether the public affairs or public policy as a practice or a department are equipped with proactive risk assessment for businesses. So if a professional is there in your department or in your company, if he's not aware about this, let's say NVGs or NGRBCs or RBCs, if they are not aware about, let's say, UN guidelines, then obviously they are not equipped. But these are some of the necessities that any public affairs professional or public policy professional needs to have. And in my response to the first question that was actually thrown up to all the panelists, is that what I said, growingly as ESG becomes more and more important, and that is going to impact the businesses, and there is where the risk assessment will come into the picture. I'll just leave you all with the name of, let's say, the BlackRock CEO Larry Fink, and especially BlackRock, which is the biggest investment company in the world. For them, these things, ESG norms or ESG guidelines or parameters, are the paramount thing for any investment or success or failure of any business. So there is where being a public affairs professional, and I believe either it was Manshu or probably Srini, you said that it is not only a government relation anymore nowadays. It has to be a 360-degree professional or the department who needs to know how the how the media will react, how the civic society will react, how the, let's say, and the government will react. So those risks needs to be assessed accordingly. And nowadays, those are impacting day in, day out. Either it is Gulf of Mexico, either it is here in any mining community that we talk about, or even the COVID pandemic that we are seeing right now. So everything has a 360-degree kind of perspective to say.
means what happens that when we do a policy analysis, we use following steps. Like if we talk about the steps of policy analysis, is the first thing is define and detail the problem. Second is to establish evaluation criteria, identify and evaluate alternative policies, monitor and evaluate the implemented policy, and then suggest policy changes. So in the course of these steps, like during the whole analysis, predictability is one of the expected outcomes from this function. And predictability only comes when we do a complete data analysis, either in terms of global data, inside data, and then functional data. A lot of data plays a major role in doing a complete in-depth analysis of the whole predictability kind of behavior. Secondly, as businesses are a lot of global and uniformity, when we talk about uniformity of policies, irrespective of developed and developing countries, what we have seen in ESG and other areas also, the role of data analytics plays a major role there also. Like, where we, and even we see like in practice, when we cite some kind of global case studies or some kind of global incidences based argument or database argument, then these arguments in the position papers are valued much better than giving just a macro view of any analysis or any problem. When we talk to the policymakers or the bureaucracy, they need complete data, like in terms of our position paper, so as to convince them. And so we believe that this data will play a major role going forward also, as the country and the world is moving into digitizing sectors of lot of things in lot of sectors. So we believe that it will be it will have a major importance.
Yeah, I take a couple of points here from Raj and Himanshu, that data analytics has been more important these days, considering that even the policymakers are doing a lot of number crunching. If you look at some of the GST tax calculations or the slab mergers, some of the policy decisions, the policy think tanks that are close affiliates of the government, they are working a lot on the data in terms of what are the kind of the situational assessment, right? If, but, yes. That becomes even more critical for the businesses, that if you have to present an irrefutable evidence, especially on the policy level, because you are talking about most of the people most of the times. So even the businesses have to clearly present a kind of irrefutable evidence. Number one. Number two, data analytics have become even more critical, because as Raj pointed out about in terms of proactive, being preempting and proactive. So I think data will present a clear-cut insights into the kind of risks that businesses can preempt and then proactively respond to. For instance, gone are those times when the public sentiment was just qualitative. It is very subjective. So one of the area. But right now, if we don't quantify this and measure this kind of subjective insight, businesses are actually going to lose out. For instance, there have been cases about diversity, inclusion, and LGBTQ community. Right? India decriminalized this. Some of the Indian businesses thought proactive and wanted to actually inculcate that in their messages and the kind of optics that they are building around their brand. And then only to remove some of these communications after a negative and adverse public sentiment. So some of the data analytics will give you a clear-cut insight into the qualitative subjects and not only the kind of a quantitative tax slabs, GSTs, etc. Net, that which cannot be measured cannot be improved. So obviously, this is need of the hour, that data analytics need to be actually inculcated as a kind of a habit into public affairs to present a kind of a compelling evidence for the policymakers and stakeholders.
And I would just like to add that, a lot of what we do is in the global ecosystem. So based on the work that I was doing on real world evidence globally, it is clear that we need to go beyond the controlled environment that we have been used to for a long time. A lot of data around what works and what doesn't work that's coming from real world setting is now being analyzed as well, both internally and as well as externally. So when we talk about use of data, one of the key elements that the data is trying to reduce is the risk itself. So when we are talking about risk assessment, having strong, credible data around different parameters reduces risk to every organization, because there is nothing speaks more candidly than data, followed by, of course, qualitative inputs, as Srini very rightly mentioned, that data is now the first point of recourse to any conflict or resolution of conflict, followed by, of course, qualitative inputs. And all of this is also leading into policy changes and reforms, both at the national as well as global level. And a lot of what is happening at the global level is also having its impact in India. So whether it's around policies related to financial processes, policies related to sustainability, diversity and inclusion, a lot of it is actually driven by both the local needs as well as the global changes. And with the global changes, a lot of data that gets generated and information that gets generated gets analyzed and localized as well, in many cases in India and beyond. So using that data in the local ecosystem, adapting that data in the local ecosystem, and sometimes extrapolating that data really leads to useful insights. And we have done that in multiple settings in India as well, whether it's in the corporate space or in the public, in the government space. A lot of it is being used. How it is being used, COVID is one of the best examples in terms of how it has been used, and very quickly so. Whether it's in terms of clinical trials readouts, whether it's in terms of disease epidemiology, where data has been used to map how the disease is spreading or receding, or use of data in terms of predicting in future. So predictive modeling and future data use is also growing. And I would just like to also highlight the fact that India currently is in a state where we can actually be a leader in terms of that space, because we have the expertise, we have the knowledge, and we have done it as well, very well in the past. All we need to do is believe in data and evidence and accurately project whatever is coming out of studies. So the most important bit is use of that data. So when we are able to analyze and project accurate data, it's equally important to respect that analysis as well, and not discount based on our individual biases. And that's the, I would say, the final mile that we still need to go to start respecting data more than our intuition. And once we start doing that, a lot of changes will happen in the way we look at responses to emergencies, responses to changes in the ecosystem. And that's what I would like to recommend as well moving forward. And that's the discussion that we often have with our colleagues and counterparts, that we need to build an ecosystem that respects and uses data appropriately. But we are almost there.
Very interesting question. And first, I will take the first part, as you said, that whether business are moving beyond purpose preaching. Please make no mistake that that is not possible with the government of the day, and it is not just true about India, but anywhere in the world. You cannot just go and purpose preach and then getting the things done with the government. The bureaucrats and the technocrats sitting there are well aware, and they are smart a lot, really smart a lot of people who will never fall into that trap. But nonetheless, I mean, yes, businesses are moving beyond purpose preaching. Gone are the days when you would have actually gone and invested CSR for just kind of showing or showcasing your what goody things that you are doing. They are actually moving beyond that. They are looking for policy framework and probably purposeful policy framework where they can actually contribute in a much better way to the society. And of course, there is an intrinsic value that is added to this when we talk about the public policy or public affairs practice. There is there where they want to find a balance between purpose preaching and doing business and policy advocacy, to say, as far as this particular aspect is concerned. Now, when you talk about PR and PA, I would say it was always these are the two sides of the same coin. It was never different. There is always this very thin line or to differentiate between PR and PA. But without PR, PA cannot survive, and without PR cannot survive. As in media, I believe a lot of media and PR professionals are there here. So they may be well aware that if you have worked in a desk, then you have to have a real experience of the field also. You have to be a reporter if you want to be a good editor. I mean, I'm talking about desk editor and vice versa, so that you know that how actually it goes. So similarly for PR and PA, it is exactly like that. So you need to understand the policy, how it works, how the government works, and you need to know that what exactly would be your pitch when you are going out to the media colleagues or media friends to pitch a story. If you want to talk about, let's say, a story related to COVID, or let's say technological development, let's say cryptocurrency, then you need to understand the law or the exact policy and the trend that you have seen in, let's say, other countries. Then only you'll be able to pitch a right story. So what I'm trying to say is that without that knowledge, the public affairs is all about policy or the government relations, then only you'll be able to pitch a right story as far as media is concerned. That is PR. PR is actually, I don't want to confine it to only media, which is actually public relation, which is a bigger set. And these two are, two subsets of that particular, one big practice to say. So just to kind of summarize it, both goes hand in hand, and there's a very thin line between PR and PA. If I want to advocate, and if I get a very good story, front page story on a ET or a Indian Express, or let's say Times, that portrays a picture about some policy, then obviously it will have an impact. But if that will only appear on the front page or the middle page or the last page, only if your pitch is very, very strong, and if the journalists are very, very smart lot, they understand that. So that is where the PA knowledge, the policy knowledge comes to the picture if you want to be a very successful PR person. At the same time, if you want to be a successful, PA person or a policy person, then you need to have a good knowledge of PR, how to do or how to sell or how to kind of highlight the pain points that you are facing in PA. So that is my 2 pence. I mean, are my 2 pences on this. There's a very thin line between these two. When you talk about a corporate PA or a campaign that I'm doing, so it comes from the top leadership or management that what exactly they want to actually achieve from a campaign. This is completely business centric. But when you talk about a larger policy aspect, again, it comes from the management, but at the same time, it's all about futuristic, goals that you are looking at. Let's say you want to enter into a new business, and then you have something in mind, and you want to taste the waters. So you ask your PA professional or the PA team that go out and just suss it out, and how the government is perceiving, how the academia is perceiving. So that is a campaign that you run. But if it is a PA, corporate PA, that means there is some problem that you are, at this point of time you are facing already. So that is the difference. One is probably long term, one is medium to short term. That is the difference.
Yeah. So from an agency perspective, Parul, so I take the industry perspective from Raj. From an agency perspective, we also share the same frequency. When we are talking about a kind of a policy, think tank who do the policy advocacy, they actually keep in a lot of holistic, futuristic, national level mandates into mind, and also try to cover different, varied sections of the communities or the people who will be impacted by that policy. So if you're talking about from a corporate PA point of view, obviously the businesses may not have everyone as a target segment or a target group, right? So they have a specific and acute level kind of an issues that they have to deal with, and they deal with it. There might be certain kind of exigencies they might just extend into a kind of a national level policy as well. However, that is much limited. So 80% towards more of the problems that they or the industry or the sector that they're facing. and then maybe 15 to 20% around what is in alignment with the kind of a national mandate. And I think one of the major things of the current panel is also is how do we align these two, right? So in a way that your pain point or your contribution or thinking around a certain change can also contribute to a kind of a trigger for a national policy, right? So I think that's what we are trying to see, that more and more corporates, as they think around their planning of their public affairs and policy driven communications and a kind of a voice out for change, how can you actually integrate that with the national agenda? So I think that becomes a kind of a win-win situation. And the kind of question that is asked, we are trying to, I mean, we cannot remove the difference. However, how much of intersection can be possible, that's where we are actually coming from. In that way, policymakers will see a kind of a sync with what industry is doing, and definitely industry will also have a larger buy-in in the policy, say when they showcase that their thinking is also for the larger national mandate.